Hi, and welcome to week 4. We're going to start with Shakespeare and then later we'll do John Donne. I'm going to focus on the sonnets because I know you'll have plenty of opportunities and you may already have had to read his plays, but his sonnets aren't as commonly examined. The context for his sonnets that's important for us to think about is essentially that there's only 154 of them and we don't know a great deal about them. They were printed in a collection by Thomas Thorpe in 1609 that was probably pirated. Probably the arrangement, the approval did not come from Shakespeare, and therefore there's not a lot we can know about the identity of the young man addressed in many of the sonnets, the identity of the dark lady discussed, the arrangement, if one should have followed another. So rather than get into literary speculation, we're going to focus just on 3 sonnets and their style, and hopefully this will give you some tools for close reading. First, I want to say a word about the English sonnet. Shakespeare, except for 3 of his sonnets, wrote strictly in this form. It's a 14-line iambic pentameter sonnet. The rhyme scheme comes in 3 quatrains and a couplet. That's 3 4-line segments. First rhymed A, B, A, B, second C, D, C, D, and so on, and then the rhymed couplet at the end. The first 2 quatrains usually set up the problem or the idea, and the third counters or complicates those, and then the couplet often, typically, resolves the conflict. There's 7 rhyme sounds and 140 syllables per poem, so you can see this is a very strict form, and Shakespeare followed it rather religiously for such a creative and restless playwright. So let's look first at a solid example of this form, Sonnet 12. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou amongst the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing against time's scythe can defence, save breed, to brave him when he takes thee hence. So again, this is a very solid structure. Let me go back and point that out. If you look at the first 2 quatrains, they set up the fact that time is passing and all things must decay. And then the complication comes in the 3rd quatrain. Then of thy beauty do I question make, that you too must go. And finally, the couplet resolves this in some fashion, saying, nothing has defense against time, save breed. And again, that save breed is the sort of counter. So you must have a child, and in that way you defeat time and decay. And of course, the lines are mostly end-stopped, which is another way of making it a very solid structure. So let's look at how alliteration works to drive this structure home. Again, if you see those first several lines, you'll notice that Shakespeare's using alliteration to drive home the very tick-tock rhythm of time passing. So again, the lines are, when I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white. Again, we get this repetition of a sound, generally on the stressed syllable, count, clock, see, sunk, and that goes back, tick, tock, time is passing. And then that's particularly driven home in line 8 when he points out with the double alliteration the solidity or the unavoidable nature of time passing, born on the bier with white and bristly beard. Again, we can't stop this. This is an inevitability. And yet, line 14, the sort of counter that how we can defeat time, also has the same weighted double alliteration, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. And even the fact that he's not just doing one sound, but he's doing 2 sounds, B-R, breed and brave, and the 3, him, he, hence, even makes stronger his counter argument that yes, we can defeat time. So alliteration works well there to drive home his message. If we look at Sonnet 55, we see the power of verbs. Let me read it first, and then we'll talk about the verbs. Not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme. But you shall shine more bright in these contents than unswept stone besmeared with sluttish time. When wasteful war shall statues overturn, and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword, nor war's quick fire shall burn the living record of your memory. 'Gainst death and all oblivious enmity shall you pace forth, your praise shall still find room, even in the eyes of all posterity, that wear this world out to the ending doom. So till the judgment that yourself arise, you live in this, and dwell in lovers' eyes. So the theme is stated, repeatedly, you will last in verse, and that will give you fame. This poem, it will make you famous, and you will outlive many, much more concrete things. Unswept stone, monuments, all of these very solid objects will pass, but you will not because of this poem. And he reiterates that 4 times in the sonnet. You can go back and look at that. But the sonnet hasn't got any particular reasoning. It's just bold assertion. So let's look at how verbs work to drive that assertion home. The vigor of the verb starts with it's not a weak verb, but it's weaker, right? And he says, just let me turn to it, not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive. So this verse, right? This powerful rhyme. And so these strong monuments will not outlive. Again, outlive is not particularly strong, it simply states a fact. But then when we move to the hero, but you shall shine more bright in these continents. Shine is a strong verb. It's not just outliving, it's not just enduring, it's shining. And then note the series of strong verbs that set up the power of destruction, which again, this verse has to work against. He has a series there of when wasteful wars shall statues overturn, and broils root out the work of masonry, nor Mars his sword, nor war's quick fire shall burn. All of these overturn, root out, burn verbs are the power of destruction. Yet out of this, the hero paces forth. He says, and that line is, shall you pace forth, your praise shall still find room. And pace forth is a particularly powerful setup because pace is not only a kind of striding, a confident movement, pacing as opposed to, say, walking or shambling, but it's also a measure of distance, how many paces, right? So we have the hero pacing into the world, facing the destruction and defeating it. And then if we just look at the way he uses a little bit of metrical variation, we see how he adds to that. He uses spondy rather than iambic in a couple of places. Now a spondy rather than a weak, strong stress of syllables is a strong, strong. So for example, when he says root out or quick fire, he's talking about powers of violence. And by stressing root out, both syllables, he makes it that much more undefeatable. And yet the hero paces forth. Pace forth. Again, another spondy. If it were either syllable were weaker, it wouldn't be as powerful. So he deliberately uses this metrical variation to further drive home his point. And finally, I want to read Sonnet 129 because this is really the closest thing we have in his sonnets to a soliloquy. And it will make you think of Faustus, I suspect. The expense of spirit in a waste of shame is lust in action, and till action, lust, is perjured, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust, enjoyed no sooner but despised straight, past reason hunted and no sooner had, past reason hated, as a swallowed bait, mad in pursuit and in possession so, a bliss in proof and proved a very woe, before a joy proposed, behind a dream. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell. So here, of course, it reads like a soliloquy, a sort of individual outcry. The speaker is in a state of sexual self-loathing. He's questioning what lust is, and lust is many things. It's a quality when it's perjured. It's a person when it's despised. And the referent keeps slipping around. Lust is so many things. But this is a real sort of raw outpouring of feeling here. And the couplet really only succeeds in the sonnet form as a sort of resolution if we read it as a voice of despair. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell. So that despair, that, and it will happen again, we can't overcome this in ourselves, is the way we might read that as a resolution. But again, I think this is the most unsonnet-like sonnet. So let's look at how he's doing this, or how he's setting this up. The rhetorical techniques he's using are multiple, but the ones I want to focus on are conjuries, repetition, and antimetaboly. Conjuries are merely the piling up or heaping on of adjectives. And so the poem meditates on lust. What is lust? Lust is perjured, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust. And this just piling on of adjectives gives us this sort of sense of being overwhelmed and disgusted that the poet is feeling. Also, of course, you can see how he's using alliteration, the sort of repetition of sound, to drive home this heaping quality: perjured, murderous, bloody, blame, rude, cruel. So conjuries, or the piling on of adjectives, drives home the message. Also repetition, which can of course cover alliteration and conjuries, but more specifically I'm interested in the way he repeats phrases here, or words. So notice when he says, past reason hunted and no sooner had, past reason hated as a swallowed bait. So for an economical form, a sonnet, it's clearly deliberate that he repeats a phrase like past reason, and that notion that he's in a state beyond reason when he's in a state of lust. So again, it drives the message home. Or in the line, had, having, and in quest to have extreme. The ability to repeat a verb in 3 different forms in one line is kind of extraordinary. And again, why do it? Because it gives us that driving sense of overwhelming lust. And finally, antimetaboly, which is simply a larger word for a reversal or a turning about. And it's so appropriate to this poem because it is a poem about reversal. It's about retribution. It's about wanting to seek revenge. So if you consider lines 2, 11, and 13, is lust in action until action lust. Again, for a poet with the world at his hands and not a lot of room, he would not deliberately use lust, action, action, lust, that kind of reversal, unless it served his point about once you have it, then you don't want it, and you will always be driven back to it. Or bliss in proof and proved a very woe. So you want it, and then once you've had it, it's a very woe. All the world well knows, yet none knows well. We know it, and yet we don't keep ourselves from it. Again, how he reverses this phraseology in order to drive home his message about the state of lust. Also, I just want to point out that in the very first line, we see antimetaboly at work, because we need to reverse these 2 lines in a sense to understand the poem. The expense of spirit and a waste of shame is lust in action until action lust. But try reversing this. Take the line, lust in action is the expense of spirit and a waste of shame. And that reversal gives us the clue to the poem. So he sets it up even as a reversal, and he's using then antimetaboly as the sort of primary function in the poem, or technique. So I know this has been a bit of a race. I'm trying to keep it all under 15 minutes, but what I'm hoping is you can get a sense of how Shakespeare's sonnets reward close reading of both language and technique. And I'm hoping you'll be able then to apply that to some of his other poems. All right, see you next when we talk about John Donne.